I came to return my mother's ring. Your mother's ring? Why would you bring it to me? Daniel Hayes's voice came out low. My mom said, "This belongs to you," she repeated. Daniel exhaled slowly, his gaze narrowing just slightly. Let me see it. Annie slowly opened her hand. A gold ring rested in her palm. He reached forward, almost without thinking, and picked it up. The metal was warm from her skin, light in his fingers, and yet it carried a weight he hadn't felt in years. He turned it slowly, a faint mark along the inside band. He remembered exactly when it happened. Lena, he murmured under his breath. The air shifted. Daniel. Victoria's voice cut in cleanly. She stepped forward from behind him, her eyes shifting to the ring in his hand, and something cold flickered across her face. Before Daniel could react, she reached out and snatched the ring from his fingers. That doesn't belong here, she said. Daniel's hand remained suspended in the air for a moment, fingers still slightly curled. Give it back, he said quietly. Victoria ignored him. Instead, she turned her attention to Annie, lowering herself just enough to meet the girl at eye level. So, Victoria said smoothly, you're Lena's daughter. Annie nodded once. Victoria studied her for a second longer than necessary, then tilted her head slightly. Tell me something, she continued, her tone calm, almost polite. Why didn't your mother come herself? A small pause. Then, without raising her voice, I assumed she had already sold it, to pay for her treatment. Annie's fingers tightened against the hem of her sleeve. She wanted to come, Annie said quietly. But she can't. Victoria's brows lifted faintly. Can't? Daniel stepped in before Annie could say more. What do you mean she can't? He asked, his voice lower now, more focused. What's wrong with her? Annie looked at him, then down at the floor for a brief second, as if choosing how much to say. She's sick, Annie answered. Daniel's jaw tightened. Sick how? She gets tired all the time, Annie said. And her legs don't work like before. She can't walk far anymore. Daniel felt something press against his chest. And she sent you? He asked. Annie nodded. She said, it was important, Annie replied. She said I had to bring it myself. Victoria let out a soft, controlled breath, straightening as she did. How touching, she said. Daniel shot her a look. Victoria, but she turned to him now, her expression sharpening. What? She asked, her voice still calm, but no longer soft. You're concerned? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Victoria's lips curved slightly, not into a smile, but something colder. Interesting, she continued. After all these years, and you still react when you hear her name. That's not what this is, Daniel said. Isn't it? Victoria stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough that it didn't carry beyond them. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're standing here holding on to a memory while your wife is right in front of you. Daniel's expression hardened. You went to her, he said. I handled a situation, Victoria replied. You humiliated her. I corrected a mistake. Annie stood very still between them, clutching her hands together. She brought a picture, Annie said suddenly. Both adults turned toward her. A picture of my mom. And you, Annie continued, looking at Daniel. She showed my mother that photo. Daniel felt the words land deeper than anything Victoria had said. She told my mom she had 2 days, Annie added, to think and bring the ring back. And if she didn't? Daniel asked quietly. Annie hesitated, then answered. She said things would get worse. Victoria didn't deny it. She didn't need to. Daniel's gaze dropped briefly, then lifted again, this time steadier, colder. Give me the ring, he said. Victoria held his eyes for a long second. Then, slowly, she placed it back into his hand. You're still thinking about her, she said. After everything, after building this life. Daniel didn't respond. You're standing here, asking about her health, Victoria continued, while completely ignoring me. That's not what I'm doing, isn't it? Her voice tightened slightly now, because it feels like I'm the only one in this room who understands what this is. Daniel's hand closed around the ring. This, Victoria said, gesturing lightly toward Annie, is the past. And the past doesn't belong here. Annie looked up at Daniel. My mom said. She began softly. Once I give that back, she hesitated, then finished. She can finally rest. Daniel's hand was still closed around the ring, as if loosening his grip might let something slip away that he wasn't ready to face. "Sir," it was Mrs. Carter. Her voice was gentle, but it carried enough weight to reach him. Daniel blinked once, then turned slightly. "When you're ready," she said. "We should move this somewhere more private." He followed her gaze. Annie was still standing exactly where she had been, her small frame steady, her eyes quietly watching him, not impatient, not afraid, just waiting. Victoria had already stepped aside, her expression unreadable now, but her silence was louder than anything she had said. Daniel nodded once. "Come with me," he said to Annie. Daniel stood near the front, one hand in his pocket, the other still holding the ring. Annie stood beside Mrs. Carter, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her posture careful. When the doors opened, they stepped into Daniel's private office, floor-to-ceiling windows, dark wood, a view of the city that most people would never see from this height. Daniel walked straight to his desk, then stopped. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at nothing. "Sit," he said finally, gesturing toward the chair across from him. Annie shook her head. "I'll get it dirty," she said. Daniel frowned slightly. "It's leather." "It's still nice," she replied quietly. Mrs. Carter moved closer. "You can sit, child." "It's all right." Annie hesitated, then slowly climbed into the chair, sitting on the very edge, her feet not even reaching the floor. Daniel watched her for a second longer than necessary, then sat down across from her. The ring was still in his hand. He placed it on the desk between them. "How old are you?" he asked. 6. "You came here alone?" "Yes, sir." "Stop calling me sir," Daniel said automatically. Annie nodded. Daniel exhaled quietly, then leaned back slightly in his chair. "How far did you walk?" he asked. "I don't know," she said. "A long time. Did anyone help you?" "No." Daniel glanced briefly at Mrs. Carter, then back at Annie. "Your mother," he said slowly. "Lena. How long has she been sick?" Annie looked at the ring for a moment before answering. "A while." "That's not an answer." She hesitated, then spoke more carefully. "Since last year," she said. "It got worse after winter." Daniel felt something tighten in his chest again. "Has she seen a doctor?" "Yes." "And?" Annie's fingers moved slightly in her lap, pressing against each other. "They said she needs treatment," she replied. Daniel waited. "And?" he pressed. Annie looked up at him this time. "They said it costs too much." If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments about where you are watching from. And if you believe in stories that stand for truth and justice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss what comes next. Daniel leaned back, his jaw tightening. "What kind of treatment?" he asked. Annie shook her head. "I don't know the name," she said. "But she gets very tired. And sometimes she can't breathe right. And her legs, they don't listen to her anymore." Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second. "And she still refused to sell this?" he asked, nodding toward the ring. Annie looked at it too, then nodded. "She said it wasn't just gold," Annie replied. "What did she say it was?" Annie's voice softened. "A promise." Daniel looked away. "She should have sold it," he said quietly. Annie didn't respond right away. Then, "She said some things aren't meant to be saved like that," Annie answered. Daniel let out a slow breath. "That's not how the world works. It is for her," Annie said. Mrs. Carter stepped forward slightly. "Would you like something to eat?" she asked Annie gently. Annie shook her head. "I already ate," she said. Daniel's eyes flicked back to her. "What did you eat?" "A sandwich." "When?" "Before I came. That was hours ago." Annie didn't argue, didn't correct him. She just looked down at her hands again. Daniel stared at her for a moment, then reached for the phone on his desk. "Send something up," he said. Simple. He hung up before anyone could respond. Annie shifted slightly in the chair. "I don't need. I didn't ask what you need," Daniel said. Annie went still. "I want to understand something," he said, his voice more controlled now. "Your mother knew who I was. She knew where I worked. Why didn't she come to me before?" Annie didn't answer immediately. She thought about it, really thought, then said, "She said you had your life." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" She said, "She wasn't part of it anymore." The words landed clean. Daniel's fingers curled slightly against the desk. "And now she sends you?" he asked. Annie shook her head. "No," she said again. She didn't want to. Then why are you here? Annie looked at the ring, then back at him. Because someone told her she had to give it back, she said. Daniel's expression darkened. And she believed that? She believed it would stop trouble, Annie replied. Daniel let out a short, humorless breath. You don't know anything about me. Annie shrugged slightly. My mom said people show who they are when they don't have to be nice, she said. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, then looked away. A knock came at the door. Mrs. Carter opened it just enough to take the tray sandwich, fries, a glass of milk. She placed it gently on the table beside Annie. Go on, she said softly. Annie hesitated, then slid off the chair and moved to the table. She sat down carefully and began to eat. Daniel watched her without meaning to, watched the way she broke the sandwich in half, set one piece aside. For later? He asked. Annie nodded. In case? She said. Daniel looked away quickly. He reached for the ring again. Daniel closed his hand around the ring, tighter this time. And for the first time in years, Daniel Hayes began to realize this situation wasn't something he could simply fix with money. Daniel didn't return to his desk after Annie finished eating. He stood by the window instead, hands in his pockets, looking down at a city that suddenly felt unfamiliar. From this height, everything always made sense. Movement was predictable. People were patterns. Problems had solutions, clean, measurable, controlled. But behind him, a 6-year-old girl sat quietly in his office, folding a napkin with careful precision, as if she had been taught that even small things mattered. Daniel could hear the faint rustle of paper, then silence again. Too much silence. He turned. Annie had finished eating. The plate was pushed neatly to one side. The glass of milk was empty. The sandwich, half of it, was wrapped carefully and placed beside the plate, just like before. She sat with her hands in her lap, waiting, not asking, not moving. Daniel walked back slowly. You can eat the rest, he said. Annie shook her head. I'm saving it. There will be more food, Daniel replied. She nodded, but didn't unwrap it. Daniel studied her for a moment, then pulled out the chair across from her again and sat down. The ring was still in his hand. He placed it on the table this time, closer to her. If your mother needed money, he said, choosing his words carefully, she could have come to me. Annie didn't look at the ring. She said no. Daniel frowned. No? She said she didn't want anything from you. The answer came without hesitation, like it had been said before, more than once. Daniel leaned back slightly. That doesn't make sense. It did to her, Annie replied. Daniel's eyes narrowed. What exactly did she say? Annie thought for a second, then answered, slowly, like she was repeating something important. She said, I made my choices. He made his. That's where it ends. The words hit harder than Daniel expected. He looked away again, to the edge of the table, to the city beyond the glass, anywhere but the child in front of him. And yet, he said quietly, she kept the ring. Annie's gaze finally dropped to it. She said it reminded her of who she used to be. Annie answered. Daniel's fingers tightened slightly against the armrest. And who was that? Annie hesitated, then said, someone who believed in promises. Silence, not empty, heavy. Daniel reached for the ring again, turned it slowly between his fingers. You said someone came to your house, he said. After that, what happened? Annie's posture shifted slightly. Not fear, but something close. My mom got very quiet, she said. Daniel didn't interrupt. She held the picture for a long time, Annie continued. Then she put it away. Did she say anything about me? Annie nodded. She said, you wouldn't remember. Daniel's grip on the ring tightened. She said that? He asked. Yes. Daniel let out a slow breath through his nose. That's not true, he said. But even as the words left him, they didn't sound convincing. Annie looked at him, not accusing, not doubtful, just watching. She also said, Annie added softly, that remembering wouldn't change anything. That one stayed. Daniel leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. What about your father? He asked. The question came more abruptly than intended. Annie blinked, then looked down. I don't know him, she said. Daniel paused. She never told you? Annie shook her head. She said it didn't matter. Daniel sat back again. A quiet tension settled into his shoulders. Does it matter to you? He asked. Annie didn't answer right away. She looked at the table, at her hands, at the edge of the napkin she had folded so carefully. Then she said, I have my mom. The answer was simple, complete. Daniel nodded slowly. Of course, that was enough for her. It had to be. Another silence stretched between them. This one longer, more complicated. Daniel glanced at Mrs. Carter, who had remained quietly near the door, observing without intruding. Have someone check on the address she came from, he said. Mrs. Carter nodded. Yes, sir. Annie looked up. You're going to my house? She asked. Daniel shook his head slightly. No. A pause. Not yet. Annie seemed to accept that. She reached for the wrapped half of the sandwich and adjusted it slightly, making sure it was secure. Daniel watched the movement. Small, careful, deliberate. You don't have to go back today, he said. Annie froze for a second, then looked up. I have to, she replied. Why? My mom will worry. Daniel exhaled quietly. She sent you out alone. She didn't want to, Annie said quickly. I told her I could do it. Daniel tilted his head slightly. You convinced her? Annie nodded. I said I'm strong. There it was again. That word. Strong. From a child who should have been worrying about school, toys, friends, not hospital visits and promises and debts. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying her more closely now. You shouldn't have to be, he said. Annie didn't understand. Or maybe she did but chose not to respond. Instead, she asked, Can I go now? The question was quiet, respectful, but it landed harder than anything she had said before. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He looked at the ring, at the girl, at the space between what had been and what was standing in front of him now. You came all this way, he said slowly. And that's it? Annie frowned slightly. I gave it back. That's not what I meant. She tilted her head, confused. Daniel pressed his lips together briefly, then said, You don't want anything? Annie shook her head. No. Not even help? No. Why not? Annie looked at him the same way she had in the lobby. Steady. Certain. Because that's not why I came. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, then asked, Then why did you come, Annie? She glanced at the ring one last time, then back at him. So my mom can rest, she said. The answer was the same. But now, it meant more. Daniel leaned back slowly. His mind was moving faster now, connecting pieces he hadn't wanted to look at before. A sick woman, a child walking alone across the city, a ring that had survived everything else, and a past that refused to stay buried. You're not going anywhere tonight, he said. The words came out before he could reconsider them. Annie blinked. What? You're staying here, Daniel repeated. She shook her head immediately. I can't. You can. My mom. We'll call her. Annie hesitated, then shook her head again. She doesn't have a phone. Daniel's expression tightened. Then we'll find another way. Annie looked uncertain now. For the first time since she arrived, I have to go home, she said softly. Daniel leaned forward. No, he said. Not harsh, not loud, but firm. Final. Annie stared at him, and for the first time, she didn't have an answer, because something in his voice had changed. Something that wasn't about control, or power, or money. Something else. Something she hadn't expected. Daniel picked up the ring again, closed his hand around it, and realized this was no longer just about returning something. It was about everything that had never been finished. And for the first time in years, he wasn't walking away. Victoria didn't leave. That was the first thing Daniel noticed. Even after Annie's voice faded into silence, even after the decision had been made, spoken clearly, firmly, Victoria remained exactly where she was. Still, watching, measuring. You're not going anywhere tonight, Daniel had said. And now the weight of those words lingered in the room like something alive. Annie sat very still in her chair, her small hands pressed together in her lap, eyes fixed somewhere between the ring and the edge of the table. I have to go home, she repeated softly. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. We'll make sure your mother knows you're safe, he said. She'll be alone, Annie replied. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't pleading, but they landed harder than anything else she had said. Daniel felt it sharp, immediate. Mrs. Carter stepped in gently. We can send someone to check on her, child. Annie looked at her, not convinced. She doesn't like strangers, Annie said. Daniel leaned forward slightly. She won't be alone, he said. Not tonight. Annie hesitated, then shook her head again, quieter this time. You don't understand. Daniel's jaw tightened just slightly. Then explain it to me. Annie swallowed. She doesn't sleep well, she said. Sometimes she wakes up and can't breathe right. And if I'm not there, she didn't finish. She didn't need to. Daniel leaned back slowly, exhaling through his nose. Across the room, Victoria let out a soft, almost inaudible laugh. Of course, she said. Daniel didn't turn toward her. Not yet. This is exactly how it starts. Now he did. What does that mean? He asked. Victoria stepped forward, her heels quiet but deliberate against the floor. It means, she said, you're already letting this go further than it should. Daniel's expression hardened. She's 6, and she's not your responsibility, Victoria replied calmly. She's here because of you. No, Victoria corrected. She's here because her mother made a choice, just like she always did. Annie lowered her eyes. Daniel noticed, and something in his chest tightened again. That's enough, he said. Victoria tilted her head slightly. Is it? She asked. Because from where I'm standing, you're standing here arguing with me while that child is slowly becoming your problem. Daniel didn't respond. Or maybe, Victoria continued, her voice dropping just enough to sharpen the edge, she already is. Silence stretched, heavy. Daniel turned back to Annie. Did your mother eat today? He asked suddenly. Annie blinked, surprised by the question. I think so, she said. You think so? She said she wasn't hungry. Daniel exchanged a brief glance with Mrs. Carter. That was enough. Have someone go there, he said quietly. Now. Mrs. Carter nodded and stepped out of the room without hesitation. Victoria watched her leave, then turned back to Daniel. This is not your role, she said. Daniel didn't look at her. It is now. The answer came without hesitation, without calculation, and that more than anything caught Victoria off guard. For the first time, her composure shifted, just slightly. You don't even know what you're stepping into, she said. Daniel's gaze moved back to the ring in his hand. I do, he replied. No, Victoria said. You don't. She stepped closer. This isn't a business deal, Daniel. You don't get to control the outcome. You don't get to fix it with money and walk away clean. Daniel's grip tightened around the ring. I'm not trying to walk away. Victoria studied him. Longer this time, more carefully. And that's exactly the problem, she said. Behind them, Annie shifted slightly in her chair. Quiet, almost invisible, but not entirely. Daniel turned back to her. Come here, he said. Annie hesitated, then slowly stood and walked toward him. He crouched down slightly, not all the way, but enough to meet her closer to eye level. When was the last time your mom saw a doctor? He asked. Annie thought. A few weeks ago, she said. Did they give her anything? Medicine? A little, Annie replied, but she said it's too expensive to keep going. Daniel nodded slowly. And you've been taking care of her? Annie nodded. I make soup, she said. And I help her stand up sometimes. The words were simple, but they hit like something much heavier. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then asked quietly, Does she know you're here? Annie hesitated, then shook her head. I left a note. That did it. Daniel stood up. Where is the address? He asked. Annie blinked. In my pocket. Give it to me. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, slightly worn from being handled too many times. Daniel took it, opened it, read it once, then again. A part of the city he knew well, but not in the way Annie did, not from the inside. Victoria watched him. Don't, she said. Daniel didn't look up. You don't need to go there. I'm not asking. You're making a mistake. Daniel folded the paper carefully, slid it into his pocket, then finally met her gaze. I already did that once, he said. Victoria's expression hardened. This is different. No, Daniel replied. It's exactly the same. Silence. The kind that doesn't break easily. Victoria straightened, stepped back. If you walk into this, she said, there's no controlling how it ends. Daniel nodded slightly. I know. And if this gets out, I don't care. That stopped her, completely. For a brief second, Victoria said nothing, because that answer didn't belong to the man she had built a life with. You will, she said finally. When it costs you something. Daniel didn't respond, because he already knew. It would. He turned to Annie. Get your things. Annie blinked. I don't have anything. Daniel glanced at the half sandwich still wrapped on the table. Take that. She nodded, picked it up carefully, held it like something important. Daniel walked toward the door, then stopped. turned back once more, looked at Victoria. For a moment, there was something unspoken between them. History, power, control, and something else. Something beginning to crack. "I'll be back," he said. Victoria didn't answer. She just watched him, watched as he opened the door, watched as Annie followed him, small, quiet, but no longer alone. And as the door closed behind them, Victoria Hayes stood in the silence of the office and realized something she hadn't expected. For the first time, she was no longer the one in control. The elevator doors closed with a soft, final sound. Daniel didn't press the button immediately. For a brief second, he just stood there, staring at his own reflection in the mirrored wall-sharp suit, controlled posture. A man who had spent decades mastering the art of distance. Beside him, Annie stood quietly, clutching the wrapped half sandwich in both hands like it mattered more than anything else she owned. "Do you get in elevators often?" Daniel asked. Annie shook her head. "No." He nodded once and pressed the button for the underground garage. The descent was smooth, silent, too quiet. "You're not afraid?" he asked after a moment. Annie looked up at him. "I was," she said. "Before?" She nodded. "And now?" Annie thought about it, then said, "I think you're trying to help." Daniel didn't respond, because he wasn't sure if that was true yet. The doors opened. The garage stretched out beneath them, concrete, polished, rows of black cars lined like obedient soldiers. Daniel led the way without looking back. Annie followed. His driver, Thomas, was already standing beside the car, door open, posture straight. "Sir," Thomas greeted. Daniel nodded once. "We're heading downtown," he said, then paused. "I'll give you the address." Thomas glanced briefly at Annie, just once, then back at Daniel. "No questions?" "Yes, sir." Annie climbed into the back seat carefully, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to touch anything. Daniel slid in after her, the door closing with a soft, sealed sound that shut the city out, or tried to. The car pulled forward smoothly. For a while, neither of them spoke. The city moved outside the tinted windows, bright storefronts, crowded sidewalks. People moving through their lives with purpose, unaware of the quiet shift happening inside the car. Daniel reached into his pocket and unfolded the paper Annie had given him. He read the address again, then passed it forward. Thomas nodded and adjusted the route without a word. "You live there?" Daniel asked. Annie nodded. "Yes." "How long?" "A long time." Daniel almost asked more. Almost, but stopped himself. Instead, he leaned back, watching the reflection of Annie in the window. She sat straight, careful, not touching anything she didn't need to, her hands still wrapped around the sandwich. "You can eat it," he said. Annie shook her head. "I told you. I'm saving it." "For what?" "In case." Daniel looked away. That word again. In case. As if the world had already taught her not to expect anything to last. The car turned off the main avenue. The streets changed, not dramatically, but enough. The buildings were older, the lights dimmer, the sidewalks less crowded. Daniel felt it immediately, the difference between the city he controlled and the one that existed without him. "How do you usually get around?" he asked. "I walk," Annie said. "Everywhere?" "Yes." Daniel glanced at her. "You don't go to school?" Annie hesitated. "I used to." "What happened?" She looked down. "My mom needed help." Daniel exhaled quietly. "Of course she did. Does anyone check on you?" he asked. Annie shook her head. "No. No system. No safety net. Just a child and a sick woman, holding on the best they could." Daniel leaned his head back against the seat. For years, he had signed checks that moved millions of dollars, funded programs, donated to foundations, built things with his name on them. And yet, this had slipped right past him. Or maybe he had never looked closely enough. The car slowed, then stopped. "We're here," Thomas said. Daniel looked out the window. The building was older than the ones around it. Paint peeling in places, lights flickering in a few windows, the kind of place people passed without noticing. "This is it?" Daniel asked. Annie nodded. "Yes." Daniel opened the door and stepped out. The air felt different here. He couldn't explain how, but it did. Annie climbed out after him, holding the sandwich tightly as she looked up at the building. Daniel followed her gaze, then looked back down at her. "Which floor?" "Third." "Elevator?" Annie shook her head. "Stairs." "Of course." Daniel closed the car door and gestured toward the entrance. "Let's go." The hallway inside smelled faintly of something old cleaner. Maybe, mixed with time. The lights buzzed softly overhead. The floor creaked slightly beneath their steps. Annie walked ahead this time. She knew where she was going. Daniel followed, his presence filling the narrow space in a way that felt out of place here. They reached the stairs. Annie started up without hesitation. Daniel followed. 1 floor, then 2. By the 3rd, Annie had slowed just slightly, but she didn't stop. At the top, she moved down the hallway and stopped in front of a door. Worn, scratched, familiar. She reached for the handle, then paused. For the first time since he had met her, she hesitated. Daniel noticed. "What is it?" he asked. Annie didn't turn around. "She might be asleep," she said. "Then we'll be quiet." Annie nodded. She opened the door, slowly. The apartment was small, simple, clean, but in the way people keep things clean when they have very little. A couch, a small table, a single lamp casting warm, soft light across the room. And in the corner, a bed. Lena lay there. Still, too still. Daniel felt it before he fully understood it. That same pressure in his chest. Stronger now. Annie stepped inside quickly. "Mama," she called softly. No answer. She moved closer. "Mama, I'm back." Still nothing. Daniel stepped in behind her, his gaze fixed on the figure in the bed. Something wasn't right. He knew it. Before Annie did, but not by much. Annie reached the bed, touched her mother's arm. "Mama?" A small pause. Then, a breath. Shallow, weak, but there. Annie let out a quiet exhale, relief flickering across her face. "She's sleeping," she whispered. Daniel didn't answer, because he was looking at Lena, really looking, and for the first time in years, he wasn't seeing a memory. He was seeing the cost of it. Annie didn't notice the silence the way Daniel did. To her, it wasn't unusual. It wasn't alarming. It was familiar. She climbed onto the edge of the bed carefully, the mattress dipping slightly under her small weight, and placed the wrapped half sandwich on the nightstand as if it belonged there. "I brought this," she said softly. "For later." Lena didn't respond, but her chest rose barely, fell again. Daniel stepped closer, slowly. Every instinct in him, trained, controlled, calculated, was telling him to assess, to understand, to fix. But this wasn't a boardroom. There was no spreadsheet for this, no clean solution, just a woman lying in a narrow bed, her face pale, her breathing uneven, and a child who had learned to interpret silence as normal. "How long has she been like this?" Daniel asked quietly. Annie didn't look at him. "Some days are worse," she said. "That's not what I asked." Annie hesitated, then answered, "Since last week." Daniel's jaw tightened. "And you didn't call anyone?" Annie shook her head. "She doesn't like hospitals." "That's not an answer." "She said they don't help if you don't have money," Annie replied. There it was again. Simple, direct, unarguable. Daniel exhaled slowly and stepped closer to the bed. He looked down at Lena, really looked this time. Her hair was thinner than he remembered, her face sharper, the softness replaced by something worn down over time. But even now, even like this, he could see her, the woman from years ago, the one who had laughed too easily, the one who had believed him when he said things he had no intention of keeping. "Lena," he said. The name felt unfamiliar in his mouth, like it didn't belong to him anymore. For a moment, nothing. Then, a faint shift. Her brow tightened slightly. Her lips parted. "Daniel?" The voice was barely there, but it was enough. Annie's head snapped up. "Mama?" she said quickly. "I'm here." Lena's eyes opened slowly, heavy, struggling. It took her a second to focus, to understand what she was seeing. First Annie, then Daniel. The recognition came in pieces, slow, painful, real. "You," she whispered. Daniel didn't move, didn't step back, didn't step forward. He just stood there. "Yes," he said quietly. Lena let out a weak breath, not quite a laugh, not quite anything else. "You're late." The words weren't angry, they weren't sharp. That made them worse. Annie looked between them, confused. "Mom, I gave it back," she said quickly. "The ring." "Just like you said." Lena's gaze shifted to her daughter, softened. "Of course you did," she murmured. Then back to Daniel. "You didn't have to come." Daniel's throat tightened. "She shouldn't have come alone," he said. Lena closed her eyes briefly. I didn't want her to, she replied. But she's stubborn. I'm strong, Annie corrected quietly. A faint smile touched Lena's lips. Yes, she whispered. You are. Daniel looked at Annie, then back at Lena. She walked across the city, he said. By herself. Lena's expression didn't change. I know. You know? She told me she could do it. Daniel stared at her. You let her go. Lena's eyes opened again, tired, but steady. I trusted her. That's not trust, Daniel said, his voice tightening. That's… what? Lena interrupted softly. He stopped, because he didn't have a word that didn't sound like judgment, and she didn't have the strength for that. Silence settled, thicker now, more personal. Annie shifted slightly on the bed, watching both of them. I did it right, she said, looking at Lena. I gave it back. Lena nodded slowly. I know. Annie hesitated, then asked, does that mean everything is okay now? The question hung in the air. Fragile, dangerous. Lena looked at Daniel, not with anger, not with expectation, just truth. That depends, she said quietly. Daniel felt it again. That pressure, that weight, the one he couldn't calculate his way out of. I didn't come for the ring, he said. Lena's lips curved faintly. No, she replied. You came because you saw it. Daniel didn't deny it, because it was true. Annie looked between them again, trying to understand something she hadn't been told. Mama, she said softly, why didn't you ever tell me about him? Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she reached for Annie's hand. I told you what mattered, she said. But he made his choices, Lena said gently. And I made mine. Daniel looked down. The words were familiar, too familiar. And Annie? He asked quietly. Was she part of that choice too? The question landed, hard. Lena's gaze sharpened just slightly. She was never a mistake, she said. I didn't say she was. You didn't have to. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't just heavy. It was loaded. Years of it. Unspoken. Unresolved. Annie squeezed her mother's hand. I'm here, she said softly. Lena looked at her, then back at Daniel. You should go, she said. Daniel didn't move. She needs rest, Lena added. So do you, he replied. I've had worse days. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's not the point. No, Lena said quietly. It never was. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Daniel stepped closer to the bed. Not too close, but closer than before. I'm getting a doctor, he said. Lena shook her head. No, that's not a suggestion. It is to me. Daniel's voice hardened. You need treatment. And you think I don't know that? Lena asked. Her voice didn't rise, but it cut, clean, precise. I know exactly what I need, she continued, and I know what it costs. Daniel didn't respond, because he knew too, and for the first time, money didn't feel like power. It felt like something else. Too late. Annie looked between them. Mom, she said. Maybe we should. It's all right, Lena said gently, squeezing her hand. Then to Daniel, you don't get to fix this. The words landed, final, but Daniel didn't step back, not this time. Watch me, he said quietly. Lena held his gaze. For a long moment, then, something shifted. Not acceptance, not forgiveness, but something close to exhaustion. Annie leaned slightly against her mother. I'm tired, she whispered. Lena brushed her fingers lightly through Annie's hair. I know. Daniel stood there, watching, understanding something he hadn't wanted to before. This wasn't just about the past, or the ring, or even Lena. This was about everything that had been left behind, everything that had grown in the space he walked away from. And now, it was all here, in one small room, with nowhere left to hide. Daniel straightened slightly, then said, I'm not leaving. Not tonight. Not this time. And for the first time, no one argued. Daniel didn't sleep. He sat in the narrow chair by the window, elbows resting on his knees, hands loosely clasped, staring at nothing in particular while the city outside moved through its quiet, distant rhythm. The apartment had settled into stillness. Annie lay curled beside her mother, one small arm draped across Lena's side as if anchoring her to the world. The half sandwich was gone, eaten in careful bites before sleep claimed her. Mr. Buttons rested under her chin, worn and trusted. Lena's breathing remained shallow, uneven. Every few minutes, Daniel found himself listening for it, counting it, as if silence might mean something final. He had spent years in rooms where silence meant power. Here, it meant something else entirely. Fragility, time, regret. He leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. In the dim light, Lena's face softened in sleep. The tension that had held her expression together earlier had eased, leaving behind something quieter, more vulnerable. And for the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to remember. Not the way memory usually came to him, controlled, distant, filed away, but raw, unfiltered. Lena standing in a kitchen that smelled like coffee and cheap paint, laughing at something small, calling his name like it belonged to her. He closed his eyes briefly. That life felt like it had belonged to someone else, someone weaker, someone who had believed that love could survive pressure. He had been wrong. A soft sound pulled him back. Annie shifted slightly in her sleep. "Mama," she murmured. Lena didn't wake, but her hand moved instinctively, resting lightly against Annie's back. Even now, even like this, Daniel watched the gesture, felt something tighten in his chest. This was what he had walked away from. Not just Lena, not just a relationship, but this, the quiet, invisible thread between two people who belonged to each other without question. He stood slowly, careful not to make noise, walked toward the small kitchen, opened the cabinet. Empty, mostly, a few cans, a box of crackers, nothing that resembled stability. He closed it again, pulled out his phone, stared at the screen. There were names he could call, doctors, hospitals, people who would move quickly, efficiently, without asking questions, people who solved problems. But Lena's voice echoed in his mind. "You don't get to fix this." Daniel's jaw tightened. He dialed anyway. The line rang once, twice. "Mr. Hayes," a calm voice answered. "Is everything all right?" "No," Daniel said. A pause. Then, "What do you need?" Daniel turned slightly, glancing back toward the bed. At Annie, at Lena. "I need a doctor," he said quietly. Now. There was no hesitation on the other end. "I'll have someone there within the hour." Daniel ended the call, slipped the phone back into his pocket. For a moment, he stood there, listening again, waiting. When he returned to the main room, Lena's eyes were open, watching him. "You don't listen well," she said softly. Daniel didn't flinch. No. Annie was still asleep, unaware. Lena shifted slightly, wincing at the effort. "You called someone," she said. "Yes. I told you not to." "I know." Silence. Not angry, not loud, just tired. "You always did what you wanted," Lena murmured. Daniel stepped closer. "And you always pretended you didn't need anything," he replied. Her lips curved faintly. "That's not pretending. That's survival." Lena didn't argue, because he wasn't wrong, but neither was she. "You think money fixes this?" she said after a moment. Daniel shook his head. "No." "Then what are you doing here?" The question lingered. Simple, unavoidable. Daniel looked at Annie, then back at Lena. "I don't know," he said honestly. Lena studied him, longer this time, searching for something. Maybe the man she used to know. Maybe proof that he was still the same. Maybe proof that he wasn't. "You're too late," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "I know." The admission came without defense, without explanation, just truth. "And yet," Lena added, "you're still here." "Yes." "Why?" Daniel didn't answer immediately, because there wasn't a clean answer, not one that made sense, not one that erased what had already been done. Finally, he said, "Because she came to find me." Lena followed his gaze to Annie, still sleeping, still holding on. "She shouldn't have had to," Lena said. "No," Daniel agreed. "She shouldn't have." Silence again. Then, a knock at the door. Sharp, out of place. Daniel straightened immediately. Lena's eyes narrowed slightly. "Who is that?" she asked. "The doctor," Daniel replied. "You don't even know if I want that." "I know you need it." Another knock. Daniel moved toward the door, opened it. A man in his early 50s stood there, composed, professional, carrying a medical bag. "Mr. Hayes," he said with a nod. "Come in." The doctor stepped inside, taking in the room quickly, efficient eyes, trained to assess. His gaze landed on Lena, then Annie, then back to Daniel. "No hospital?" he asked quietly. "Not tonight." The doctor nodded, understood. He approached the bed slowly. "Ma'am," he said gently. I'm going to take a look at you. All right? Lena didn't respond immediately, then gave a small nod. Annie stirred slightly but didn't wake. The examination was quiet, careful, professional. Daniel stood back, watching every movement, every expression, trying to read what wasn't being said. Finally, the doctor stepped away, his face neutral, but not reassuring. She needs more than this, he said quietly to Daniel. This isn't something you manage at home. I know. She's been sick for a while. Daniel nodded. Yes. The doctor glanced back at Lena, then at Annie. You're out of time, he said. The words landed, heavy, final. Daniel looked at Lena. She was already watching him. She had heard. Of course she had. I told you, she said softly. Daniel stepped closer. This time, closer than before. You don't get to decide that alone, he said. Lena held his gaze, tired, but still strong. I've been deciding it alone for a long time. Daniel didn't look away. Not anymore. The room fell silent again. But something had changed. The lines had shifted. The distance, gone. Annie stirred once more. Her eyes fluttered open slightly. She looked up, at Daniel, at her mother, at the man standing beside them who hadn't left. You're still here, she whispered. Daniel nodded. I said I would be. Annie's eyes closed again. Trust. Simple. Absolute. And for the first time, Daniel understood the weight of it, not as something given, but as something that could be lost, just as easily. He reached down slowly and adjusted the blanket around her, careful, deliberate, like someone learning something for the very first time. And this time, he didn't step back. The doctor didn't leave right away. He stood near the doorway, watching Daniel in a way that wasn't intrusive but wasn't indifferent either. There's a hospital 2 miles from here, he said quietly. I can call ahead. Daniel didn't answer immediately, because Lena was still looking at him, and this time, there was no distance left in her gaze, only clarity. I'm not going, she said. The words were soft, but final. Daniel took a slow breath. You don't get to refuse help when it affects her, he said, glancing at Annie. Lena's eyes flickered, just slightly. That's exactly why I can, she replied. Daniel frowned. That doesn't make sense. It does if you understand what happens next. Silence. Then Lena shifted slightly, wincing again. The moment I step into that hospital, she continued, everything becomes official. Records, bills, questions. Daniel's jaw tightened. I can handle that. Lena gave a faint shake of her head. No, she said. You can pay for it. That's not the same thing. The distinction hung in the air. Sharp, uncomfortable. The doctor cleared his throat softly. She's right about one thing, he said. Once she's admitted, it becomes a system. You can't control all of it. Daniel looked at him. I don't need control, he said. I need her alive. The doctor didn't argue, because that part was true. Annie stirred again, her small hand tightening slightly against the blanket. Mama, she murmured. Lena turned her head just enough to look at her daughter. I'm here, she whispered. Daniel watched that exchange, felt it again, that quiet, unbreakable thread. And for the first time, he understood something he hadn't before. This wasn't just about saving Lena. This was about not breaking Annie. Give us a minute, Daniel said to the doctor. The man nodded and stepped outside, closing the door behind him. The room felt smaller without him, more personal. Daniel turned back to Lena. You're scared, he said. Lena almost smiled. Of course I am. Then why are you fighting this? Lena didn't answer right away. She looked at Annie, then back at Daniel. Because I've seen what happens to people like us in places like that, she said quietly. Daniel's expression hardened. That's not how it works anymore. Lena held his gaze. Maybe not where you live. That landed. He didn't have a response for that. Not one that didn't sound like denial. She needs you, Daniel said, nodding toward Annie. I know. Then stay. I'm trying. Daniel stepped closer, closer than he had been before. You don't get to try, he said quietly. You either do it, or you don't. Lena's eyes narrowed slightly. You always liked things simple. No, Daniel said. I liked things honest. Silence. Heavy. Then Lena asked, if I go, what happens after? Daniel didn't hesitate. You get treated. And then? You recover. And then? She pressed. Daniel paused. Because now they weren't talking about medicine. We figure it out, he said. Lena studied him. You mean you decide? Daniel shook his head. No, not this time. She didn't believe him. Not yet. You walked away once, she said. I know. And now you're here because a 6-year-old showed up at your door. Daniel didn't deny it. Yes. And when this gets complicated? Lena asked. When it stops being something you can solve in a day? Daniel met her gaze. It already is. That answer shifted something, just slightly. Annie moved again, blinking her eyes open. She looked at both of them, then whispered, Are we going somewhere? Daniel knelt beside the bed. Maybe, he said. Annie frowned slightly. Mama doesn't like hospitals. I know. Annie looked at Lena, then back at Daniel. Will she be okay if we go? Daniel didn't answer immediately, because this time, he wouldn't lie. She has a better chance, he said. Annie processed that, carefully, then turned to Lena. Mama, we should go. Lena's expression softened. You don't have to be brave all the time, she said gently. I'm not, Annie replied. I'm just asking. That broke something. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Lena closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, looked at Daniel, and for the first time, there was something different there. Not resistance, not surrender, something in between. All right, she said quietly. Daniel didn't move, didn't react, not outwardly, but inside, something shifted. All right, he repeated. Lena nodded. On one condition. Daniel waited. You don't disappear again. The words were simple, but they carried years inside them. Daniel held her gaze. I won't. Lena studied him, long enough to make sure, then gave a small nod. Then we go. Daniel stood immediately, moved to the door, opened it. The doctor was already there. Waiting. She's coming, Daniel said. The man nodded once, relief flickering briefly across his face. I'll call it in. Within minutes, everything began to move, quietly, efficiently, but this time, not cold, not distant. Annie climbed down from the bed, holding on to Mr. Buttons as she watched the adults shift into motion. Daniel helped Lena sit up, carefully, slower than he was used to doing anything. You're not very good at this, Lena murmured. Daniel almost smiled. No, but you stayed. Yes, that's new. Daniel didn't answer, because she wasn't wrong. They moved toward the door together, Lena leaning slightly into him, Annie walking close beside them, not holding his hand, not yet, but close enough. As they stepped into the hallway, the world outside felt different, not because it had changed, but because something inside it had. For the first time, this wasn't about control, or power, or fixing something broken. This was about staying, even when it was complicated, even when it cost something. Annie looked up at him as they walked. Mr. Daniel, he glanced down. Yes, you're still coming with us, right? Daniel didn't hesitate. Yes. Annie nodded, satisfied, and as they stepped out into the night, for the first time in years, Daniel Hayes wasn't walking away. He was walking toward something he couldn't control, and choosing it anyway. The hospital lights were too bright. Daniel noticed it the moment they stepped through the sliding doors. Not just bright, but unforgiving. Everything was clean, sterile, controlled, nothing like the apartment they had just left behind. And yet, it didn't feel safer. Annie walked close beside Lena, her small hand gripping the edge of her mother's sleeve, as if letting go even for a second might make everything fall apart again. Daniel stayed on Lena's other side, steady, supporting her weight without making it obvious. Name? The nurse at the front desk asked, already typing. Lena hesitated. Just for a moment. Daniel saw it, felt it. Lena Brooks, she said quietly. The nurse nodded, entering it without looking up. Date of birth? Lena answered. The questions came quickly after that. Routine, impersonal, but each one chipped away at something. Daniel stepped in when needed. Calm, direct, insurance, payment, responsibility. The nurse's tone shifted almost instantly, not warmer, but more attentive. Someone will take you back shortly, she said. Daniel nodded once. They moved to the waiting area, rows of plastic chairs, muted television overhead, the quiet hum of people waiting for something they couldn't control. Annie sat between them, still holding Mr. Buttons, still watching everything. Is this where they fix people? She asked softly. Daniel looked at her. They try, he said. Annie nodded. That's good. Simple, hopeful, too honest. A nurse called Lena's name. They stood. Daniel helped her up again. Annie followed immediately. "I'll come too," she said. The nurse hesitated. "Only one can. She stays with us," Daniel said. No force, no raised voice. But the nurse didn't argue. "All right," she said. They moved through the hallway. White walls, soft footsteps, the quiet urgency of a place that never really slept. They reached a room. Lena was guided onto the bed. Machines, monitors, everything began to attach, measure, track. Annie stood close, watching, not afraid, just learning. Daniel stood at the foot of the bed, out of the way, but not distant. A doctor entered, mid-40s, sharp eyes, professional. He reviewed the chart quickly, then looked at Lena. "How long have you been feeling like this?" Lena gave a faint, tired smile. "Long enough to know I should have come sooner." The doctor didn't smile back. "Symptoms?" She listed them. Short, minimal. Daniel knew there was more. There always was. The doctor nodded. "We're going to run some tests," he said. "Blood work, imaging. We need a full picture." Lena didn't argue. "Not now. Not anymore." "Is she going to be okay?" Annie asked. The doctor paused, looked at her, then at Daniel, then back at Annie. "We're going to do everything we can," he said. Annie accepted that, because she didn't know what it really meant. Daniel did, and it wasn't enough. The tests began, one after another. Time stretched, slowed. Annie grew quieter, sat in the chair beside the bed, her legs tucked under her, Mr. Buttons in her lap. At some point, she leaned against the side of the mattress, fell asleep. Daniel watched her, then looked at Lena. Her eyes were closed, but not sleeping. "I told you," she murmured. Daniel stepped closer. "Told me what?" "That this would happen. And yet," he said quietly. Lena opened her eyes, turned her head slightly toward him. "You always did wait until the last possible moment." Daniel didn't deny it. "I'm here now." Lena studied him for a long time, then said, "That doesn't erase before." "I know. Then what does it do?" Daniel didn't answer right away, because he didn't have one. Finally, "It changes what happens next." Lena's gaze softened, just slightly. Before she could respond, the doctor returned. This time, different, more serious. He closed the door behind him, looked at Daniel first, then Lena. "We have the initial results," he said. The room shifted. Subtle, but real. Daniel felt it immediately. "What is it?" he asked. The doctor exhaled slowly. "It's more advanced than we hoped." Silence. Lena didn't react. Not outwardly. Daniel's jaw tightened. "What does that mean?" The doctor chose his words carefully. "It means we're dealing with something that's been developing for a while. Her lungs are compromised. There's infection, and something more underlying that we need to address immediately." "Treatable?" Daniel asked. "Yes," the doctor said. "But not simple." "How long?" The doctor hesitated. "That depends on how she responds." Daniel stepped closer. "That's not what I asked." The doctor met his gaze. "It's serious." The words landed. Hard. Final. Annie stirred slightly in her sleep, unaware. Lena looked at Daniel, and for the first time, there was no wall left. Just truth. "I told you," she said quietly. Daniel shook his head. "No," he said. "You told me it was bad. You didn't tell me it was this." Lena didn't argue, because she hadn't. The doctor spoke again. "We're admitting her," he said. "Starting treatment immediately." Daniel nodded. "Do whatever you need to do." The doctor hesitated, then added, "She's going to need support. Long term. This isn't a quick recovery." Daniel didn't look away. "She has it." The doctor glanced at Annie, then back at Daniel. "Good," he said, and left. The room fell silent again, but this time, it wasn't the same. This silence had weight, a direction, an outcome. Daniel looked at Annie, then at Lena, then back again. "This is where it changes," he said quietly. Lena watched him. "Or where it ends," she replied. Daniel stepped closer. "No," he said, his voice steady now. "Certain. This is where I stay." Lena didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. And in the chair beside the bed, Annie slept, trusting, as if the world had finally stopped shifting beneath her. And for the first time, Daniel understood exactly what was at stake. Not money, not reputation, not the past, but something far more fragile. something he had never learned how to keep. And now, he was out of time to learn slowly. Morning came without ceremony. No sunrise through soft curtains. No quiet sense of renewal. Just fluorescent light, machines, and the steady, mechanical rhythm of something being kept alive. Daniel hadn't moved. Not really. He stood near the window most of the night. Jacket off, sleeves rolled once at the wrist, watching the slow rise and fall of Lena's chest like it was the only thing keeping the world in place. At some point, a nurse had brought Annie a blanket. She was still in the chair, curled, small, her head tilted at an angle that couldn't be comfortable, but she hadn't complained. She hadn't woken. Daniel stepped closer. Carefully, he adjusted the blanket slightly, tucking it around her shoulders the way he had seen Lena do just hours earlier. Annie stirred. Her eyes fluttered open. For a second, she looked confused. Then, she saw him. "You're still here," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "I said I would be." Annie studied his face, like she was checking for something, making sure. Then she nodded once and sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. "Is Mama okay?" Daniel didn't answer immediately, because this was the moment, the kind no one prepares you for, where truth matters more than comfort. "She's getting help," he said. Annie tilted her head slightly. "That's not the same thing." Daniel almost smiled. "No, it wasn't. She's still fighting," he said instead. Annie looked at Lena, then nodded. "Okay." She accepted it, not because it was easy, but because she had learned how. The door opened quietly. A nurse entered, checking the monitors with practiced efficiency. "Vitals are stable," she said. More to the chart than to them. Daniel nodded anyway. "Doctor will be in shortly." She left just as quietly. Annie climbed down from the chair, walked to the bed, took Lena's hand. "Mama?" Lena's eyes opened slowly, tired, heavy, but aware. "I'm here," Annie said quickly. Lena's lips curved faintly. "I know." Her voice was weaker now, thinner. Daniel felt it immediately. "Did you sleep?" Lena asked. Annie nodded. "A little." "Good." Annie hesitated, then asked, "Are you staying here?" Lena looked at Daniel, then back at Annie. "For a while," she said. Annie squeezed her hand. "That's okay," she whispered. Daniel watched that exchange, then stepped closer. "The doctor said treatment starts today," he said. Lena nodded slightly. "I figured. You should have told me sooner." Lena didn't respond, because there was no point. That time was gone. A knock. Then the doctor entered again. Same man. Same controlled expression. But now, more direct. "We're starting antibiotics immediately," he said, checking the chart. "And we're running additional scans this afternoon." Daniel nodded. "And the underlying issue?" The doctor glanced at Lena, then back at Daniel. "We'll confirm after imaging," he said. "But we're preparing for something chronic, possibly long-term management." Annie listened, quiet, trying to understand words that weren't meant for her. "Will she come home?" she asked suddenly. The doctor paused, then crouched slightly to her level. "Not today," he said gently. Annie nodded. "Okay, no tears, no panic, just acceptance." Again, Daniel felt it this time. Stronger. This wasn't strength. This was something learned. Too early. The doctor stood. "I'll be back after rounds," he said, and left. The room settled again. But this time, it felt different, not uncertain, just real. Annie climbed back into her chair, pulled her knees close, held Mr. Buttons against her chest. "Mr. Daniel," she said quietly. He looked at her. "Yes? Are you going to work today?" The question caught him off guard. For a second, he didn't understand it. Then he did. "No," he said. Annie blinked. "Why not?" Daniel glanced at Lena, then back at Annie. "Because I'm here." Annie thought about that, then nodded slowly. That makes sense. Of course it did. To her, presence was simple. You either stayed, or you didn't. Lena watched him, quiet, careful. "You're missing things," she said softly. Daniel didn't look at her. "They'll wait." Lena studied him. For how long? Daniel finally turned. "As long as it takes." Silence. Not disbelief. Not quite trust either. Something in between. "You always had control over your time," Lena said. Daniel shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "I just chose what mattered." "And now?" Daniel looked at Annie, then back at Lena. "Now I'm choosing differently." That landed. Quiet, but solid. Lena closed her eyes briefly, as if absorbing that, or deciding whether to believe it. Annie shifted in her chair. I can help, she said suddenly. Daniel looked at her. With what? Anything, she said. I can sit. I can be quiet. I cannot get in the way. The words hit harder than anything else in the room. Lena's eyes opened again. Annie, she said softly. You don't have to. I know, Annie interrupted. But I can. Daniel stepped closer, knelt slightly. Not fully, but enough. You don't have to earn your place here, he said. Annie frowned. I'm not. Yes, you are. She hesitated, then said, That's how it works. Daniel shook his head. Not anymore. Annie looked at him, trying to understand, then glanced at Lena. Lena gave a small, tired nod. Listen to him, she said. Annie looked back at Daniel, still unsure, but she nodded. Okay. It wasn't full belief, but it was something. Daniel stood again. The room felt different now, not lighter, but steadier, like something had shifted into place. Outside, the hospital moved through its routine. Doctors, nurses, lives intersecting for brief moments before continuing on. Inside, time slowed, focused. Lena watched Annie. Annie watched Lena. And Daniel, for the first time in a very long time, didn't feel the need to be anywhere else. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't take it out, didn't check it, didn't care. Because, for once, everything that mattered was already in front of him, and he wasn't going to miss it again. By noon, the room had changed. Not in any visible way. The same machines hummed, the same monitors blinked in steady rhythm, but something beneath the surface had shifted. The tests were no longer just tests. They were answers waiting to be spoken, and everyone in the room felt it. Annie sat cross-legged in the chair, a paper cup of apple juice resting carefully in both hands. She hadn't spilled a drop. She hadn't asked for more. She hadn't complained once. Daniel noticed. He noticed everything now. The way she rationed small things. The way she watched adults before speaking. The way she made herself smaller in rooms that didn't belong to her. It wasn't discipline. It was survival. Lena lay still, her eyes half open, following Annie's movements like they were the only thing grounding her. You should drink it before it gets warm, Lena murmured. Annie nodded and took a small sip, then another. Slow, measured. Daniel turned slightly toward the window, but he wasn't looking outside. He was listening, counting, thinking in ways he hadn't in years. Not about markets, not about decisions that could be undone with money, but about something far less predictable. What came next? The door opened. The doctor returned. This time, no chart in hand, no pretense of routine. Daniel straightened. Lena didn't move. Annie looked up. Can you step outside for a moment? The doctor asked gently, glancing at Annie. Daniel answered before Lena could. She stays. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. All right. He closed the door behind him, and for a brief second, no one spoke, because they all knew. This isn't just an infection, the doctor said. Lena's eyes closed, not in surprise. In confirmation, Daniel didn't move. Go on, he said. The doctor took a breath. The scans show significant damage to the lungs, he explained. But more importantly, there's an underlying autoimmune condition. It's been progressing untreated. Silence. Thick. Final. Can you fix it? Daniel asked. The doctor chose his words carefully. We can manage it, he said. With aggressive treatment, medication, and long-term care, she can stabilize. Daniel stepped forward. And if we don't? The doctor didn't hesitate. It will continue to get worse. Annie's fingers tightened around the cup. But she's here now. Daniel pressed. So we treat it. Yes, the doctor said. But you need to understand this isn't something that goes away. It becomes part of her life. Daniel nodded once. Then we deal with it. The doctor looked at Lena. You'll need to stay here for a while, he said. Then outpatient care, regular monitoring, medication likely for the rest of your life. Lena opened her eyes again. Slowly. How long? She asked. The doctor didn't pretend to misunderstand. If managed properly, years, he said. And if not, he met her gaze. Less. The truth settled into the room like dust. Unavoidable. Annie spoke first. So, she's not going to die? The question was small, careful, but it held everything. The doctor softened slightly. Not if we take care of her. Annie nodded. That's good, she whispered. Daniel exhaled quietly. The doctor turned back to him. There's another factor, he said. Daniel's eyes sharpened. What? Stress, the doctor replied. This condition worsens under strain. She needs stability, consistency, support. Daniel nodded. She has it. The doctor glanced around the room, at Annie, at Lena, then back at Daniel. Good, he said again, and this time, it carried weight. He left without another word. The door clicked shut. Silence followed. But this silence was different. Not fear, not uncertainty. Something clearer, defined. Annie slid off the chair, walked to the bed. See, she said softly, taking Lena's hand. You're staying. Lena looked at her. A faint smile touched her lips. Looks like it. Annie leaned in slightly. Then I'll stay too. Daniel stepped closer. You don't have to stay here all the time, he said. Annie shook her head. I want to. Lena watched them both, then said quietly, She needs school. Daniel nodded. I know. Annie looked between them. I can do both, she said quickly. I can go and come back. Daniel crouched slightly. You don't have to figure everything out today. Annie frowned. But if I don't, you will. He interrupted gently. Just not all at once. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Okay. It wasn't complete understanding, but it was enough. Lena shifted slightly in the bed, her eyes on Daniel now. You're taking this on, she said. It wasn't a question. Daniel didn't pretend it was. Yes. Lena studied him. You don't do anything halfway. No. And when it gets complicated, Daniel met her gaze. It already is. A pause. Then Lena asked, What do you want from this? The question lingered. Honest. Direct. Daniel didn't answer immediately, because this time, he didn't want to get it wrong. Finally, he said, Nothing. Lena's expression didn't change. That's not true. Daniel shook his head slightly. It is, he said. I'm not here to take anything. Then why are you here? Daniel looked at Annie, standing between them, small, uncertain, brave, then back at Lena. Because I left once, he said quietly. And I'm not doing that again. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They stayed right where they were spoken. Lena held his gaze. Long, searching, and for the first time, she didn't push back. Annie squeezed both of their hands at once, a small, instinctive gesture, but it connected them, all three, and something about that, something simple, almost invisible, shifted the space between them, not fixed, not healed, but different. Daniel stood there, feeling it, understanding it. This wasn't about repairing the past. It wasn't about making up for what had already been done. It was about something harder, staying, without guarantees, without control, without knowing how it would end. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, louder this time, insistent. He ignored it, because some things, once you missed them, you didn't get another chance. And this was not something he was going to miss again. The call came in the late afternoon. Daniel felt it before he heard it. That subtle vibration in his pocket, again persistent, deliberate, unwilling to be ignored. This time, he didn't ignore it. He stepped out into the hallway, the hospital door closing softly behind him, sealing off the quiet world he had begun to understand. The screen lit up. Victoria, of course, he answered. What is it? No greeting, no pretense. Victoria's voice came through calm but sharpened at the edges. You've been unreachable. I'm busy. A pause. Then, with her? Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. Victoria exhaled slowly. I told you this would happen. Daniel leaned against the wall, eyes closing briefly. This isn't your concern. It became my concern the moment you walked out, she replied. Do you have any idea what's happening right now? I don't care. You should. Her voice hardened. Board members are asking questions. You missed 2 meetings. Deals are being delayed. People notice when you disappear, Daniel. Daniel opened his eyes, looked down the empty hallway. People passed. Doctors, nurses, lives intersecting and moving on. None of them cared about boardrooms, or deals, or power. Then let them notice, he said. Silence. Longer this time. More dangerous. You're risking everything, Victoria said quietly. Daniel shook his head. No, he replied. I already did that. Victoria didn't respond immediately, because she understood what he meant, even if she didn't accept it. This woman, she said finally. She had her chance. She made her choices. Daniel's jaw tightened. So did I. And now you're trying to undo it. No, he said. Victoria let out a quiet, almost disbelieving breath. You think staying fixes anything? Daniel looked through the glass panel in the door. At Annie. At Lena. No, he said. But leaving broke it. That landed. Harder than anything else he had said. Victoria's voice softened. Not with kindness. With calculation. And what about us? She asked. The question lingered. Heavy. Direct. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Because, for the first time, he wasn't sure what us meant anymore. Finally, he said, this isn't about you. It is when you walk away from everything we built. Daniel straightened. That wasn't everything. Victoria went quiet again. But this time, it wasn't controlled. It was something else. Something closer to anger. You're choosing them, she said. Daniel didn't deny it. Yes. The word was simple. Final. Victoria inhaled slowly. When she spoke again, her voice was colder. Then don't expect things to be the same when you come back. Daniel's expression didn't change. I'm not coming back. Silence. Absolute. For a moment, even the hallway felt still. Then, you don't mean that. I do. You're throwing away your life. Daniel looked at his reflection in the glass, then at Annie again. No, he said quietly. I'm finally choosing one. Victoria didn't speak again. The line went dead. Daniel lowered the phone slowly. For a moment, he just stood there, not thinking, not calculating, just standing. Then he opened the door and stepped back inside. Annie looked up immediately. You left, she said. I came back, he replied. She studied him for a second, then nodded. Satisfied. Lena watched him too, but her gaze was different, more searching. What did it cost? She asked quietly. Daniel walked back to the bed, stopped beside her. Everything I thought mattered, he said. Lena held his gaze. And now? Daniel looked at Annie, then back at her. Now I know what does. Lena didn't respond, but something in her expression shifted. Not fully, not completely, but enough. A nurse entered briefly, adjusting the IV, checking the monitor, then leaving again without interrupting the quiet tension in the room. Annie climbed back into her chair. Are we staying here tonight? She asked. Daniel nodded. Yes. She seemed to consider that, then asked, will you be here too? Daniel didn't hesitate. Yes. Annie leaned back slightly, pulling the blanket up again. Okay, she said. Simple. Trusting. Lena watched her daughter, then turned back to Daniel. You can still walk away, she said softly. Daniel shook his head. No, this isn't your responsibility. It is now. Lena studied him. You keep saying that. Because it's true. No, she said gently. Because you want it to be. Daniel didn't argue. Because she wasn't entirely wrong. I should have been here, he said instead. Lena's expression tightened slightly. You weren't. I am now. Silence. Then Lena asked, and when it gets harder? Daniel met her gaze. Then I stay anyway. The answer came without hesitation, without doubt, and that was new. Lena saw it, felt it, and for the first time, she didn't push it away. Annie shifted again, her voice softer now, sleepier. Mr. Daniel? He turned. Yes, you said before, people who stay are family. Daniel paused, then nodded. I did. Annie looked at him, then at Lena, then back again. Then, are you staying? The question was quiet, but it held everything. Daniel stepped closer, not just to the bed, but into something he had avoided his entire life. Yes, he said. Annie smiled, small, but real. Okay, she whispered, and as she drifted back toward sleep, the room settled again. But this time, there was something new beneath it. Not fear, not uncertainty, something steadier, something earned. Daniel sat down beside the bed, not at a distance, not standing, staying, and for the first time, he didn't feel like a visitor in someone else's life. He felt like someone who had finally chosen where he belonged. The night settled in slowly, not with darkness but with quiet. The kind of quiet that only comes when decisions have already been made, and there's nothing left to argue. Daniel sat in the same chair, closer now, not watching from a distance, not standing like he didn't belong, just there. Lena slept, not the shallow, restless kind from before, but deeper now, pulled under by medication and exhaustion. The machines kept their steady rhythm. Proof. Time. Still moving. Annie was asleep again. Curled in the chair, one hand hanging loosely off the side as if she had fallen asleep mid-thought. Mr. Buttons rested against her chest. Daniel watched her for a long moment, then stood, walked over, and gently lifted her. Careful, awkward, unpracticed, but deliberate. She stirred slightly, her head falling against his shoulder. He froze for a second, not from fear, from unfamiliarity, then adjusted his hold. Steadier, carried her to the small couch along the wall, laid her down, pulled the blanket over her, the way Lena had done before, the way he was learning. Annie didn't wake, but her fingers found the edge of his sleeve for a brief second, then let go. Trust, even in sleep. Daniel stepped back slowly, watched her, then turned toward the window. The city outside had changed. Lights, softer, movement slower. For the first time in years, he wasn't part of it, and he didn't miss it. Behind him, Lena stirred. A small shift, a breath. Then, "You're still here." Her voice was quiet, but clearer than before. Daniel turned. "Yes." Lena opened her eyes slowly, looked at him, really looked. "You haven't checked your phone in hours," she said. Daniel glanced at it on the table. Dark, silent now. "I don't need to." Lena studied him. "You always needed to." "Not anymore." Silence, but not uncomfortable, not sharp, just unfamiliar. "You walked away," Lena said. Daniel didn't deny it. "Yes." From her. "Yes." From everything. Daniel nodded. "Yes." Lena watched him for a long moment, then asked, "Why now?" Daniel stepped closer. Not rushed, not defensive, just honest. "Because she showed up," he said. Lena's gaze flickered toward Annie. Still sleeping, still holding on. "She shouldn't have had to," Lena said. "I know. You keep saying that, because it's the truth." A pause. Then Lena asked, "And what are you going to do with it?" Daniel didn't answer immediately, because this time, the answer mattered. "I stay," he said. Lena's expression didn't change. "Staying isn't enough." Daniel nodded. "I know." "Then what?" He looked at her, then at Annie, then back again. "I learn how," he said. That was different. Not a promise. Not a solution. Something harder. Something real. Lena exhaled slowly. "You always liked control," she murmured. "I liked certainty. And now?" Daniel shook his head slightly. "Now I don't have it." Lena almost smiled. "Good." The word surprised him. She saw that. "You were always too sure of yourself," she said. Too sure of what mattered. Daniel didn't argue, because she was right. "And now?" she asked again. Daniel looked at Annie, then back at Lena. "Now I'm paying attention." Silence. Longer this time, but softer. Lena shifted slightly, wincing again but less than before. "Do you remember the ring?" she asked suddenly. Daniel's eyes moved to her hand. Bare, then back to her face. "Yes. I almost sold it," she said. Daniel didn't react, not outwardly. "When Annie was younger," Lena continued, "there were nights I didn't know how we were going to make it." Daniel's jaw tightened. "But I kept it," she said. "Not because of you." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know. It reminded me of who I used to be," Lena said. "Before everything got smaller." Daniel looked at her. "It wasn't supposed to get smaller," he said. Lena met his gaze. "It always does," she replied. "Unless someone stays." The words settled between them. Clear. Unavoidable. Daniel didn't look away. "I'm here now." Lena held his gaze. "For how long?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "As long as it takes." No conditions. No timeline. Just that. Lena studied him, searching for something. Maybe the old version of him. Maybe the man who had walked away. But she didn't find him. Not completely. Not anymore. Annie stirred on the couch. Her eyes fluttered open. She looked around, disoriented for a second, then saw them. "You're both here," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "Yes." Annie pushed herself up slightly. "Did I fall asleep?" "Yes." She frowned a little. "I didn't mean to." "That's okay," Lena said softly. Annie looked at her, then smiled. Small, relieved. "You look better," she said. Lena reached out weakly. Annie climbed off the couch and moved to the bed, taking her hand again. "I'm getting there," Lena said. Annie nodded, then looked at Daniel. "You stayed," she said again. Daniel met her eyes. I told you I would. Annie studied him, longer this time, then said something quiet, something simple, but something that landed deeper than anything else. People don't usually do that. Daniel didn't answer, because she was right. They didn't, and he hadn't. Not before. But now he was. He stepped closer to the bed, close enough to be part of it, not outside it, not observing. Present. Lena looked at him, then at Annie, then back again, and for the first time, there was something like acceptance in her eyes. Not complete, not perfect, but real. You don't get to leave halfway through this, she said. Daniel nodded. I won't. Annie squeezed both of their hands again. This time, stronger, more certain, as if she was holding something together, something fragile, but growing, and in that small hospital room, with machines humming and the city moving somewhere far outside, a different kind of life was beginning, not built on promises, not built on control, but on something far more difficult, and far more honest. Staying. The morning didn't rush in. It arrived slowly like everything else in that room had learned to do. Soft footsteps in the hallway, muted voices behind closed doors, the steady rhythm of machines that had become, somehow, reassuring instead of frightening. Daniel hadn't left. Not once. Not overnight. Not even for coffee. He stood by the window again, but this time he wasn't watching the city. He was watching the reflection behind him. Lena, resting. Annie, still asleep on the couch. One arm wrapped around Mr. Button's. Her face finally relaxed in a way he hadn't seen before. Peace. Not complete, but real. The door opened quietly. A nurse stepped in, checking charts, adjusting the IV with practiced care. She had a stable night, she said softly. Daniel nodded. Good. Lena stirred slightly, her eyes opening. She looked different, still tired, still fragile, but clearer, more present. You stayed, she said again. Daniel turned. Yes. She studied him for a moment, then nodded, this time not questioning, accepting. Annie woke a few minutes later, not startled, not afraid, just waking. She blinked, sat up slowly, and looked around, then smiled. You're both here. Daniel felt something shift in his chest. Every time she said it, it mattered. Yes, he said. Annie slid off the couch and walked straight to the bed, like it was the most natural thing in the world. How do you feel? She asked. Lena smiled faintly. Better than yesterday. Annie nodded, satisfied. That's good. Simple. Clear. Enough. The doctor returned shortly after, this time with a lighter step. Not relaxed, but less urgent. We're seeing improvement, he said, reviewing the monitor. The treatment is working. Slowly, but it's working. Daniel exhaled quietly. Not relief, not fully, but something close. And long term? He asked. The doctor nodded. We'll manage it, he said. Medication, follow-ups, adjustments. It won't be easy, but it's possible. Possible. That word carried weight. Annie looked up. That means she's coming home? The doctor smiled slightly. Not today, he said. But soon. Annie nodded. Okay. No impatience. No frustration. Just trust. The doctor glanced at Daniel. She'll need stability, he said again. A consistent environment. Support. Daniel didn't hesitate. She'll have it. The doctor studied him for a second, then nodded. Good. He left. The room settled again. But this time, it felt different, lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because something had begun. Annie climbed onto the edge of the bed carefully. Not too close. Just enough. Can we go home together? She asked. Lena looked at her, then at Daniel, then back again. Yes, she said softly. Annie smiled, then looked at Daniel. You're coming too, right? Daniel didn't answer immediately, because this was the moment. Not the hospital, not the crisis, but what came after. The part that required more than staying for a night, more than showing up once. It required something permanent. He stepped closer, close enough to be part of them. Yes, he said. Annie nodded, like she had expected nothing else. Okay, that was it. No celebration, no disbelief, just acceptance. Because to her, it made sense. People who stayed. Lena watched him, carefully. You know what that means, she said. Daniel met her gaze. Yes, this isn't temporary. I know. This isn't something you can walk away from when it gets hard. Daniel didn't look away. I'm not going anywhere." The words were steady, grounded, different from anything he had said before. Lena studied him, searching, and for the first time, she didn't see hesitation. She didn't see distance. She saw someone who understood what it cost, and chose it anyway. Annie reached for both of their hands again, not thinking, not asking, just doing it. Daniel felt her fingers wrap around his, small, warm, certain, and Lena's hand, weaker, but there, connected, 3 points, one line, fragile, but holding. Outside, the city continued, unchanged, busy, unaware, but inside that room, something had shifted permanently. Daniel looked down at Annie, then at Lena, then at their hands, and for the first time in his life, he understood something no deal, no power, no success had ever taught him. Family wasn't built by promises. It wasn't guaranteed by blood. It wasn't secured by control. It was chosen, again, and again, and again, even when it was hard, even when it cost everything, even when there was no certainty it would last. Annie leaned slightly against Lena, careful, gentle, then looked up at Daniel. "Mr. Day." "Daniel?" He smiled faintly. "Yes." She hesitated, then asked, "Are you happy now?" The question caught him off guard, because no one had ever asked him that before. Not like this, not without expectation, not without something behind it. He thought for a moment, not about the past, not about what he had lost, but about what was in front of him. Then he answered, "Yes." Annie smiled, satisfied. "That's good," she said. And somehow, that mattered more than anything else. Lena closed her eyes again, not from exhaustion this time, from something softer, something closer to peace. Daniel stayed where he was, didn't move, didn't need to, because for the first time, he wasn't waiting for something else. He wasn't planning the next step. He wasn't looking for control. He was exactly where he needed to be, and he knew it. The machines continued their quiet rhythm. The light shifted slowly through the window, and in that small hospital room, a man who had once walked away from everything finally understood what it meant to stay. The story teaches a powerful lesson about the transformative power of compassion, trust, and the choice to stay for others. It reminds us that true family is not defined by blood, wealth, or status, but by the courage to show up, protect, and care for those who depend on us. Sometimes the hardest hearts can learn to love, and the most broken lives can find healing when someone chooses presence over convenience, loyalty over fear, and kindness over indifference. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.